Walter Hayes had lived peacefully for 32 years until his new neighbor stacked cinder blocks across his driveway. Trevor refused to move them, forcing the 73-year-old to park on the street despite his bad knee. After being dismissed repeatedly, Walter then began to observe Trevor's behavior closely. What the old man discovered would bring his neighbors unforeseen regret. Walter Hayes had called the same suburban street home for 32 years. At 73, each morning meant a drive to the local diner for breakfast. Afternoons brought trips to the library or errands around town. That changed when Trevor Mills bought the house next door. Trevor arrived in his late 30s with big plans and even bigger noise. Construction sounds became the new soundtrack of the neighborhood. One Tuesday morning, Walter stepped outside to find his path blocked. Cinder blocks sat stacked across the end of his driveway in a neat, deliberate line. He stared at them for a moment, then walked next door. Trevor answered the door. He explained that a delivery truck needed space to maneuver. The blocks would be moved later that day. Walter nodded and returned home, expecting the issue to resolve itself. But the blocks remained through the week. Walter knocked again on Friday. This time Trevor seemed annoyed by the interruption. He claimed the area at the end of the driveway was technically shared space. If Walter had a problem, he could just park on the street. It wasn't that big of a deal. Trevor closed the door before Walter could respond. Walter began parking on the street. Each morning he locked his car and limped the extra distance to his front door. Each evening he made the same painful walk back. His knee throbbed with every step. The simple act of going to breakfast had become a challenge. He started paying closer attention to Trevor's property. During his painful walks from the street, he studied the modifications happening next door. An idea began forming. Walter drove to the city planning office one morning, curious about something. He approached the counter and asked general questions about home improvements. He mentioned he was thinking about making some changes to his own property and wanted to understand the rules. Walter thanked her and left with several informational pamphlets. He spent that evening reviewing them carefully at his kitchen table. Then he pulled out his camera. Over the next few days, Walter documented everything. He compiled everything into a detailed report, including dates and descriptions of each modification. Then he visited the city code enforcement office and filed anonymous complaints. The clerk accepted his documentation without asking questions. An inspector would visit the property within 2 weeks. Walter returned home and waited. 12 days later, a city vehicle pulled up in front of Trevor's house. A man in a polo shirt carrying a clipboard spent nearly 2 hours examining the property. He took photos, made notes, and measured various elements. Then the notices began appearing. Thick envelopes from the city arrived at Trevor's mailbox. The garage conversion lacked proper permits and failed to meet electrical code standards. The deck expansion exceeded allowable lot coverage limits. The fence violated height restrictions for residential zones. Trevor needed to either obtain retroactive permits and bring everything up to code, or demolish the unpermitted work entirely. One afternoon, Trevor stormed across the yard and pounded on Walter's door. When the old man answered, Trevor's face was red with anger. He accused Walter of reporting him to the city. He called him vindictive and threatened legal action for harassment. Walter remained calm. He explained he had no idea what Trevor was talking about. Perhaps someone else in the neighborhood had concerns. Or maybe the city conducted routine checks. These things happened. Trevor couldn't prove anything. He left, still fuming, and Walter closed his door quietly. The real consequences began in the weeks that followed. Contractors arrived to assess the damage. The garage needed complete rewiring to meet code. The insulation was inadequate. Ventilation systems had to be installed. The deck required structural reinforcements and foundation work to support its expanded size. The fence had to come down and be rebuilt at the legal height. Walter watched it all unfold from his living room. He estimated the costs in his head, adding up contractors, materials, permit fees, and inspection charges. Tens of thousands of dollars easily. Trevor tried fighting some of the citations. Walter heard through neighborhood gossip that he had hired a lawyer and attended multiple hearings, but the violations were clear. The work had been done without permits, and it didn't meet code. The city gave him a choice: comply or face escalating daily fines that would eventually place a lien on his property. The work dragged on for months. The costs mounted higher than anyone had imagined. Walter heard from a neighbor that Trevor had taken out a loan to cover the expenses. The man looked exhausted every time Walter saw him. The confidence and swagger from those first weeks had vanished completely. Then one morning, Walter looked out his window and saw something different. His driveway was completely clear. The cinder blocks had disappeared overnight. No note, no explanation. They were simply gone. Walter put on his jacket and walked outside. Trevor stood in his yard, supervising workers who were removing another section of his fence. Their eyes met across the property line. Trevor looked defeated, older somehow, worn down by months of fighting a battle he couldn't win. Walter said nothing. He simply nodded once, then climbed into his car. He backed out smoothly, taking his usual route down his driveway, the path he had used freely for 32 years. He drove to the diner for breakfast. He never mentioned the code violations to anyone. The complaints remained anonymous, filed away in city records with no name attached. Trevor never blocked his driveway again. Sometimes the most expensive lessons come from the simplest acts of disrespect, and sometimes an old man with time and patience can teach those lessons without saying a word. The cinder blocks had cost nothing. The lesson they inspired had cost everything. What would you have done if a neighbor blocked your driveway and refused to move?